So today I'll be going over the Kobayashi, both how to use and, perhaps, how to dismantle. I assume that we all know what the Kobayashi is, do we not? Can anyone tell me what they are? Okay, Mr. Monday does not. Okay, even some 6Qs don't. Really? Alright, I knew it had gotten a little bit unpopular. I had no idea it was so unpopular that that there'd actually be quite a few people that don't know what it is. You've probably seen it before. I would imagine that you've seen it before. Chances are you have and you simply don't know the actual name for it. I'm like that in a lot of different things. But let's go ahead and just set up something here. Starts out easily enough. You have your option of not playing it and playing something modern, let's say the Chinese Fuseki. But maybe even playing the Chinese Fuseki to death, and you just feel like going ahead and playing something different. So you can approach. Very important to approach from the lower right, because the Kobayashi does center around the 3-4 stone, much like the Chinese Fuseki does, only slightly different, which we will be going over shortly. Now, assuming your opponent does not pincer you, which is always a danger, but assuming they back off, you can go ahead and take yourself the K4 stone, and this happy little formation is known as the Kobayashi. Now, those of you who do like playing modern, I will go ahead and say that you don't have to go ahead and back off high. You could even go ahead and play the low Chinese here if you'd like, playing for a very, very fast sort of framework. But that is another lecture that I will also be going over in the future. For now, we're going to concern ourselves with this. What do we do against this? A little bit more difficult to understand how easy it is to go wrong with this particular opening. With something like the Chinese, it's really, really simple because we see the pincered stone right there staring us in the face. If we approach it, we clearly understand that we're pincered, and it's going to be black's turn, so we're in a little bit of trouble here. But with this, not so much, because there's nothing over there. We're not being pincered. How can we possibly go wrong with anything that we play here? Well, it's not that it's easy to go wrong. It's just, it's really easy for black to go right. For example, let's take some very normal approaches. Let's say we approach low here as white. Well, a real no-brainer move for black can be simply to respond by attaching to your stone. This way, black is getting a pretty strong area here up onto the 5th line, if we continue to play normal Joseki, and he also happily has a move at K4 using the influence he's obtaining right now. So this seems pretty simple. If we approach normally high, believe it or not, we have the exact same option. We can go ahead and attach here as black, and depending how white wants to respond, lag, there we go. And depending on how white wants to respond, once again, it's very, very simple for black to turn that K4 stone into some solid points. So these are the kinds of things that we usually want to avoid. We want to try to not make essentially this area of black's grow really, really quickly, as we can see it do. We don't want to go ahead and solidify 5th and 6th line territory for black, which we can, again, pretty easily see it do if we're not careful. But before I go ahead and mention the proper ways to approach this, I will go ahead and mention one other thing, and that is some aggressive players can also use K4 not to build up, but to attack. Because if we're pincered very, very tightly here, wait, is p5 simple way or right way? P5 is one simple way for black to respond. It's very straightforward. K4 was placed because he wants to build up there. White approaches, we can attach to continue building up. Very, very simple in that regard. But you can play aggressively here as well. Because if white jumps out, now what do? Typically speaking, we want to go ahead when we jump out and use our influence to attack something. But how can we use influence to attack when with one move we suddenly find ourselves behind enemy lines again? It doesn't really work out. We're in trouble. We have to not defend our newly created stone as we might want to do. We're going to have to go back and make sure that we're not getting surrounded here. So this can be used aggressively as well. Just be careful because, as you can see here, we're kind of lowered to the third and second line by trying to play aggressively. If you don't profit from your attack, then you might not like the Kobayashi as much as if you simply developed it for territory. What if white pincers f3? Then you're not in the Kobayashi. Nothing you can do really about that. Typically, I can give you a preference. My preference when I'm pincered, either because I was hoping to play the Kobayashi or maybe I was hoping to play the Chinese, I might either back off and continue playing the Chinese, or I might go back into a territorial style and enclose, and just play from there. Because it's very difficult to actually kill off f3. It can take a lot of punishment and still live. But that's a different opening and a different lecture. So, if these, and I'm going to label them, if these are the questionable way to play, A and B, what do we commonly see here? Any ideas? O4, R6. O4 would be very, very odd. It's an interesting idea, though. That would be normal if we were dealing with the Chinese Fuseki. You can go ahead and force an enclosure, and then you'd back off, ideally. But here you can see there's nowhere to back off to. I mean, you can play a one-space extension maybe, but that's not living locally. You're just going to be... This group is just going to be harassed forever and ever and ever. And you don't really want to do that. R6, yes. R6 and Q6 are... excuse me. R6 and Q6 are normal. Idea being we're approaching a little bit farther away. It's going to be a little bit more difficult for black to solidify what he's trying to develop. Very unlikely we're going to be pincered and be put in that aggressive variation that I showed. I was trying to sort of limit black's easy options here. Of course, since this Fuseki has been played to death, there are still easy replies. Black can, for example, decide for himself what he wants to do. Does he want to play for influence, or does he want to play for territory? And this is a very, very important point to decide before you reply to white's approach. Because for some reason, I have taught students who absolutely hate developing influence, but they will respond with Q5. A nice little shoulder hit that is seeking to go ahead and still build up, more of an influential strategy. Instead, they might want to go ahead and simply defend their corner, push white away, play for territory. So whether you like playing for territory or influence, it's a good idea to go ahead and ask yourself that question before you reply here, because A or B are both very good moves. It's simply a matter of what kind of game that you wish to play. Let's assume that you are a territorial player, so you decide to go ahead and play A. Well, white obviously is not going in the corner anytime today, so he needs a base. So typically he'll back off a 2-space. Now, it would be a bit of a mistake to say, I'm going to play elsewhere now. I mean, you could go ahead and do other things, but these 2 stones aren't fully alive just yet. You can still harass a 2-space extension. So typically we follow up by putting as much pressure on that group as possible. And here's where we run into problems with Q players, typically around the 5Q range. You've probably heard me say this before. Q players start getting a pretty nice handle on life and death. They know that this 2-space extension can live. That as is, right now, most people aren't worried about dying with this group. So they'll go ahead and they'll play elsewhere. Trouble is, if you left that group as is, it can be kept low. Now, will that group die? Of course not. It's not going to die. However, you are helping black develop, because by keeping you low, he's getting more influence, allowing him to develop, since he's got that nice happy little K4 stone right there waiting for that development. So playing elsewhere, maybe not such a great idea right now. And it works both ways, incidentally. Let's just assume that for some reason we did not want to develop the bottom and you wanted to develop the top. You could also go ahead and connect the other way. Not really applicable here. Just showing you it works both ways. You can develop the top, you can develop the bottom. With that 2-space group there still needing an extra move to get out to defend against that, which is why it's what we typically see here. Now, not only is this stone threatening to come out and not wanting to be kept low, it's also threatening to go ahead and invade, because as we can see here, huge extension between Q3 and black's K4 stone. If black suddenly says, okay, I'm going to play elsewhere, well then white can go ahead and either come in come in high rather, just seeking to push black down, make certain that there's not much territory to be had here anymore. For the more aggressive players, we might consider invading, trying to surround the stone, or we might consider something like this, trying to attack these 2 stones, maybe, I don't know, on this board. Oops, no, I don't want that stone. Maybe on this board, for some reason, white's really, really strong here. Then going ahead and putting pressure on these 2 stones, forcing them to defend, might also be a good idea. Obviously, black doesn't like those options. So black typically wants to go ahead and defend. Cover up his weakness. Which isn't that bad. I mean, 4th line territory is nothing to be embarrassed about. This is quite a lot for black to have obtained for himself, reasonably speaking. That's a nice, healthy amount of territory. I don't think anyone here would mind getting that for themselves. Of course, there is one way, and this is primarily aimed at the stronger players who might be watching. There is one other move you could play before that, and that's to see if you even need to play it at all. You could go ahead and probe here first, at Q7. This is seeking to figure out which way white wants to respond, either low or the center. If white plays the center, then he's kind of giving his hand away. He's telling you, I want to go ahead and keep you low here. So instantly we see black say, no, you're not going to do that, I'm going to defend myself. Of course, since that's been denied, and since this is still open and with a possibility of connection, white typically responds by defending, making sure that stone doesn't go anywhere, and creating almost a happy face. So very close, so very close. Just need 2 more stones. But it's a nice solid position to have. Of course, if white says, no, I want to have a nice solid group here, I don't want to worry about floating or anything like that, well, now you don't really have to go ahead and necessarily connect here, because you still have this cut, assuming it works for you. Right now, for example, if we play this, oops, there's a ladder. So maybe our next move isn't going to be to play down, or go over here. Maybe our next move isn't going to be to play down here. Maybe our next move is going to be to play over here somewhere and see if we can't get that ladder working so we can go back and cut through. Because if we can cut through this securely, then we're threatening again a very large area on the bottom for ourselves again. Now, there was a couple of questions that I missed. I'm going to go back and answer those. Romulus, generally speaking, how do I choose between P6 and P9? White P6 and P9. Oh. Well, if you pick P9, then you're not really aiming at that bottom anymore, are you? I mean, if you tried to aim at the bottom with an invasion, black could respond by getting strength off of your group and threatening to surround your stone. So this isn't generally seen. This is typically a move that we see that's played out of order, or, well, incorrectly, rather. P9 is generally a mistake. Most people mean to play P6. P9 is a lot lighter. I again don't feel the need to go ahead and defend here. I probably would actually attach to this immediately. I don't think I'd be able to look at this and resist the urge to gain some territory up on the 6th line like this, because this is still using the Kobayashi fairly well. Let's see, anything else? I play it because everyone else plays it, yeah. Can white ignore the probe and play N4? Ignore the probe and play N4. Let's go ahead and give that stone a better relationship. Let's say you play O4 instead. Now, can you do that? If you do, you're going to get sliced through. At that point, you're losing stones. Because you can't defend, both of these at once. So by doing this, you're saying that, oh, did it mean something else? Oh, wait, I got this position wrong. Oh, wait a minute, he meant this. Well, still, similar. Whoops. You're gonna get cut. And at this point, we're gonna have to defend ourselves. I don't really know how. But essentially, we've just given ourselves 2 weak groups to have to worry about, and that's uncomfortable. Because the minute he defends one, we kind of have to defend both, because we're not totally alive on the bottom, we're not totally alive on the right. Black's get strong in the middle. Not going to go very well. No problem. Anything else? No. Okay. I will go ahead and say, sometimes your opponent will not back off low. Sometimes your opponent is absolutely loving influence. He's going to go ahead and back off high. You have similar ideas here. You could go ahead and approach, because now the approach is a bit more severe. With a throw-in, you're threatening to do two things. Either come out or connect in one of two fashions. So this typically requires some sort of defense. And depending on that defense, you can see where you're going to go ahead and respond. But let's say your opponent doesn't do that. Which I guess is possible. Actually, better yet, what if we did that instead? No, let's do this. Let's keep it simple. Let's assume your opponent did this. You approached, maybe farther back, so he didn't feel like he had to defend. Aside from A, can anyone tell me any other way to use these two stones to your benefit? Any other creative ideas out there besides throwing in at A? P6. That's creative, sure. Q6, the attachment. Good memory. Q8 is actually what I was looking for. Very good. A is more of a territorial invasion. You're looking to get in, rob the base, and connect back, probably on the third line. But if you are playing, let's say you're looking at this and you decide that you want to play for influence, you could feasibly go ahead and threaten to play something like this, and give white the influence. Because by doing this, you might stand to get a rather large wall here by keeping white low, forcing him to connect. This would also be a fairly... This would also be a fairly nice way of using the Kobayashi to your benefit. Let's see, I think that about covers that. Let's go ahead and talk about this. B, the small, or the shoulder hit rather, there's quite a few different moves here that we can discuss. Some of them are old-fashioned, some of them are fairly new. I'll try to go over a couple of both, because there are a lot of different variations here. The other one is typically blessedly simple. You're probably going to go ahead and jump away, can put pressure on you, defend your interests, move on to something else. This, on the other hand, has a lot of different possibilities. Typically speaking, the most common move that white's going to have is to threaten your corner, in which case you have to decide one of two things. Are you an aggressive player? Are you going to pincer? Are you a greedy player? Are you going to push up? I can pretty much say, well, it doesn't hold true all the time, but for some reason that I just do not understand, a lot of players do like choosing B around the 1Q, 1 Don level, I've noticed. Not really certain why. Maybe they're bad at invading, and they see this as being just huge. And it is. Admittedly. It's a nice wall. Chances are black's going to get a fair few points there. That's true. Might even play something like this right now to make it even larger. It's nice development. Admittedly, it's nice development. However, white's not doing so bad himself either. I mean, white can still go ahead and extend along the right-hand side of the board for territory. Corner's still open. We don't know what's going to happen with that. He's picked up a fair few amount of points for himself. Might pick up a few more in the corner. If he gets to extend, that's a lot as well. And you have to ask yourself, how many points is this worth? Well, let's assume that you're going to get at least 4th line territory, right? 1 second. Alright. Let's assume you're at least going to get most of this as 4th line territory. How many lines are here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Almost 10. Let's go ahead and just round it to 40. Why? Because I like nice numbers like that. So the question becomes, where is white going to get 40 points? Well, you know he's got the 6.5. He just made what I cleared off the board. Way to go there. He just made some territory on the right-hand side. If he gets the corner, who knows, might have a little bit more. But he's got at least, at the moment, what is that? 5, 6.5, alright, so he's got at least 11 points at the moment. This is probably going to be worth, I would assume, 10. He can respond right now, for example, and take the territory. He can go ahead and enclose and make sure he's picking up a bit more. So even though you have something this large, it's still a very even game. Only now most of black's interests are in the center, whereas white's are kind of spread out. White's interested in the right-hand side, he's interested in the left-hand side, he can still develop the top fairly easily. It's a bit risky to play. A lot of players actually play this, and then just their game becomes slack, because they see this as being so large, how could they possibly lose? And they can. This can still be reduced, albeit lightly. And you need more territory than what you see there. So you still have to be very, very careful. That's why instead of letting white simply go ahead and live lightly while developing, we typically see the more aggressive approach, or pincer in this case. Try to unsettle white. Make it harder for him to actually get himself life here. That way maybe he won't pick up as many points, maybe it's harder for him to expand along the top side, and maybe we can still pick up some points instead, as well. So here, don't go in the corner. Bad to go in the corner first. Definitely come out. You don't want black completely enclosing your corner and getting a wall up to the 8th line. We can file that under horrible things we don't want to see happen. And now white's given black a couple of different options. Let's go ahead and take the old-fashioned option. It used to be that we would see this immediately. Seems reasonable. Give white the cut point, he has to defend it, because we just denied him in the corner. So he would go ahead and defend. Black would go ahead and hane. White would keep those separated. Black would threaten to pull out his stone. White would keep it. And then black would, of course, defend his interests. Actually, not that way. There we go. This way, we're getting territory without being greedy. Everything's a bit more solid. A bit harder for white to go ahead and cleanly expand on the right-hand side, given that we have invested a stone in R11. This is still played occasionally. There are a few more aggressive variations, though. And these more aggressive variations essentially stem from the idea that maybe this is still a little bit too good for both players, because you're never going to be able to assault this group ever again. If you can envision such a way, congratulations, I'm amazed, but the stone's pretty much dead. White's obviously got enough base to live for 2 eyes. So he is going to be able to expand. He's going to be able to attack this because he's from a strong position. Maybe we've taken a little bit too much Aji away from there. maybe we should do something else. And before I get to something else, I'll go ahead and go to that question. Why is S7 needed? That was the first question that was asked. Why is that needed? Why do we have to play that at all? Why do we have to defend it? Maybe we should go ahead and come out again. Maybe that's the better idea. Black will, of course, go ahead and poke it. We'll have to connect. Then we can simply defend ourselves. Make sure that we can't be leaned on easily for influence. But White is still rather content here, because he's out, and he's got a clear objective. He wants to get stronger, preferably, to go ahead and harass this a little bit. Ah, you've seen this variation before, Bulko. Experience in your own games. Which were you, black or white, when you played this? Really? Was it this exact position? Or something different? Not exactly like this. We have a lot of time. If you want, I could actually give you control so you can show us what happened to you. If you feel like showing anyway. Alright, no problem. So yes, here we would like to go ahead and preferably attack this group. However, I still remember adding up eyeless, yeah. Well, you're not running completely eyeless. You know that you can get one in Gote. So, there's that at least. All we need to do is make sure that we can get another one out there in the center. But we have to be careful how we do it, because we can't just go ahead and say, haha, I'm going to attack you now. Because this is horrible. Allowing essentially your opponent to go ahead and really hurt your shape, give you this annoying cut point. Bad times. Similarly, if black simply jumps out, then what are you going to do? It looks like, once again, we have to defend our cut point. I guess we can do it this way. Black will, of course, defend. But it's not looking like the kind of thing that we want to play for ourselves. We're going to be kind of harassed here regardless of what we do. As white. We don't have any ways to connect. We're clearly two groups, both needing to live. Black seems to be connected up and only has the one in the middle. So, have to be careful of this variation. As white. Usually, instead of this, we defend ourselves first. We don't go and try and attack, typically. We'll go and try and do something else. Like maybe leaning on the bottom before going back and doing anything. Because if we can force our opponent to help us get stronger, then sure, we can go ahead and attack this. What was I about to cover? Mind, spacing. Right. The modern variation, though, is to go ahead and not play this move first, but to go ahead and play here. The reason being is there's a really large greed test coming up. If white says, haha, I can Hane now, well, okay, maybe you can. But what are you going to do if white fixes? We suddenly find ourselves, not that, with a cut point that we seriously don't want to do, because this is kind of the other variation, only worse. We don't really have the same options anymore, do we? We're just sort of being surrounded and hurt. I don't think anyone here wants to really be white right now. living with quite literally just two eyes. You could consider this a grand old failure. So white still has to be careful. Typically, we'll go ahead and attach. Or he can go ahead and attach. Black will hane. White typically fixes because now there's a cut point. At this point, black has to decide. Black could decide, okay, forget the cut point, I'm going to defend. White gets to cut through and live. Oops, that's retarded. White gets to cut through and live. Everyone's settled, time to move on to other things. But typically not going to happen that way. Typically, black's going to go ahead and fix himself. At that point, white gets shape. Black's now on the third line, which is still reasonable. Black's still getting territory. White now has shape in the center. And happily for white, there's still these 3 stones that we could potentially attack later. My preference right now is that I like this shape for white. I do not mind this position at all. I found myself playing it in many games. I like having something to attack. I like having light shape in the centers that I can attack from. I just like this a lot. I've seen Lee Chang-ho play a bit more aggressively to go all the way to a large knight connection, because you're still not able to do much. You can't really cut that. Either are fine. What else was there? Well, how are you gonna cut it? This way? Are you... Alright, you are. Okay. Well, for one, there's a slight problem that the clamp might work. If we clamp, that's not going anywhere. And if we get more aggressive, then this might be a little bit of a problem, because now you might be giving up stones in exchange for the corner, and that, well, maybe not the corner, but this is turning into a much better result for white, because now you're on the second line, and that could also be a problem. Other obvious reasons. White can simply go ahead and connect, because you can't really cut through this anymore. There's just not enough Aji to go ahead and use this effectively, unfortunately. So can't really cut through that very well. Still, best option is to go ahead and connect up. Worry about that extra extension later on. Are there any questions about anything I've gone over so far? Because now that I've gone over some of the variations that I like, I'm about to go over some of the variations that I... what's a good word to describe this? Extremely detest? Let's go with that, yeah. Because there are a few other variations here, one of which I think could go with that too, yeah. There are some variations that I think favor white very, very well. Might go over that later. I was going to go over something that we probably actually see still. Let's start with this one. If you've played if you play the Kobayashi, or against Kobayashi, sometimes your opponent will pincer, but be a little bit uncertain of where they're going to pincer, and occasionally people pincer high. The trouble with pincering high is, again, we can push. And if we push, black's going to block. And if we hane, Oh no, we're cut. What are we going to do now? I recommend being really, really happy. I've seen this played professionally. I don't agree that it's an even result. I never will agree that it's an even result. I'll never play it as black. I think this is disgusting on a level that I can't fully express. Because, not that. White gets to Atari. And black will extend. And white gets to Atari. Black will try and be sneaky and keep getting his influence. And if we simply go ahead and say, I am living in the corner now, you've just been duped. Because yes, this would be pretty good for black. This would be wonderful for black. Luckily for us, we don't have to play that passively. We can go ahead and Atari. But wait, what happens if black takes the stone? Well, then you can go ahead and Atari, at which point the stone will be taken, and you can Atari again, and then fix your shape. Black has no choice but to Atari, and take in Gote. So now, we've got pretty decent life in the corner. I have to say that's fairly decent. I mean, we're getting a fair few number of points here for ourselves. Black has huge influence, but your cutting stone isn't dead. This will be brought back to life, or will be threatened to be brought back to life. Something to give him forcing moves in that huge influence that you're just referring to. Furthermore, what do we actually have on the bottom? What can we say that we're actually going to get here in endgame? Because we still have weaknesses here. That's a problem. We now also have weaknesses here that are threatening to either connect up, or can flat out jump over, or can push and then threaten. I mean, there's just so much horrible Aji lingering in this position that I don't like it. And yet I'll never forget the game that I saw this variation played twice. I saw it played in, I think it was the lower right-hand corner and the upper left-hand corner. I think it was played both by different players. They both decided to play it. And I just shuddered and ceased to watch. Because I hate this variation. I simply don't think black gets enough. If you think that is fine influence for you, I'm not telling you not to play it. I'm just saying I hate it. That's all I'm saying. But it still exists, and if your opponent does go ahead and pincer you high, depending on how you feel about that, you could jump for joy or be worried. I'd choose the whole jumping for joy bit. But that's just me. Let's see, what else do we have here? Thinking. I don't really see much else. Occasionally we see players pincer too far away. Pretty much similar as the previous, only a lot easier. I mean, in the other variations we saw black able to go ahead and push here and poke at this from a solid point. Here we don't really have that, because later on we can go ahead and attach to this stone, and unless black really wants to go ahead and run this out, which could be a really, really bad idea, especially if white gets a strong position on the outside, then it just doesn't go anywhere. Could black pincer R6 direct? Didn't I? Oh, good. I'm glad you mentioned that. Very good question. Because we do see that. Yes, absolutely, we do see that. And I typically regard it as a good indication that my opponent doesn't know what he wants to do. Because he has a nice framework or beginning of the framework, on the bottom of the board, he could easily develop from, either influentially or territorially. Whichever way he wants to roll, he can go ahead and develop that way. But the minute he decides that I'm not interested in that area, I'm going to go ahead and pincer you instead, a little flag goes on in the back of my head, and I start wondering if he really knows what he's doing here. Because at this point, I'm going to go ahead and attach. And if we see the normal Joseki, which is Tahane, then there's a problem here. Because white or black's completely shifted directions. He's no longer really gaining on the bottom of the board, is he? White's now on the bottom of the board and not surrounded bottom of the board. I mean, if it was a kind of bottom of the board which maybe saw something like this, sure, it would be a good result. But white's not fenced in. White can still come out. White can still attack. And the newfound influence that we have over here isn't really aimed at being taken advantage of anything. I mean, maybe, again, if there was something like, I don't know, this, then I can see why he changed directions, because there's a framework on the top as well, and he's getting influence to work with that framework. But with the Kobayashi, we don't usually have that there. We've got the framework on the bottom, so changing up and deciding to develop the top is a little bit unusual. Of course, some people will not play normal Joseki. They will go ahead and Hane, which is also fine. Because what happens here? Well, you have a choice. White can go ahead and connect, and simply get shape here. So still able to settle fairly well. Not as horrible. It's a bit of a shame that we're probably not going to be able to attack very well from here anymore. Black has to look after N8. Still a bit of an odd position. Because after we have N8, we're probably going to see H3 taken advantage of. Of course, you can also play this way. Might lead to the same thing that I just showed. Might lead to something different, I suppose, depending on how black wants to play. But still very unusual. In this case, this position, it looks more like a 4-4 position than a 3-4. Same thing here. This is no longer a 3-4 variation. It's kind of turned into a 4-4. It's as similar as if as if this really was a 4-4 point, and you invaded and black developed or blocked on this side. It's the I'm never finding that variation, aren't I? I can't compare it. Shoot. Are you there, Mr. Variation? No. Oh well. Suffice to say, it's pretty much the exact same thing. Which also stands to mean that white doesn't have to go down, white can go ahead and come up and further annoy you, which is probably what I would do. I like Q6. I really like Q6. I like leaving Aji behind for my opponent to be annoyed over. And, misclick. And this definitely leaves Aji behind. If you don't know why it leaves Aji behind, I will be probably going over that in another lecture. What else do we have? Ooh, I'm ignoring Nidally. So basically white will be happy no matter what black does. That is a very good comment. That's a very good comment. I would say not that white will be happy no matter what black does, but white should have absolutely no reason to be afraid of the Kobayashi. And I have seen people who do not like play against the Kobayashi because 9 times out of 10, black will go ahead and develop the bottom in this fashion for influence, and they just see that as being too much. The minute this stone is on the board, they just completely get disheartened because they're not good at reduction, which in and of itself is a different lecture. And it's understandable it's completely understandable why. Because if we take this variation again, and let's just go ahead and play something reasonable here. What would be reasonable here? This would be reasonable. Let's go old school. Why not? Let's say you play something like this, and your opponent doesn't defend himself, and really, really tests your ability to reduce. So maybe he jumps up instead, threatening your 3-3, because as we all know, if we don't defend the 3-3 right now, then this gets very, very complicated. Our little mass of stones here becomes very, very ugly. We have nothing in the corner. We have no real influence to speak of. We kind of have to defend and hope we don't die. That's kind of odd, given the strength that we had in that corner. And I guess while I mention that, I'll go ahead and point out the proper variation. If you find yourself in this position, don't block that. Hane and use your influence. But yeah, so let's say has to defend. At that point, black can go ahead and lean and keep building up. And sure, that looks scary. That looks extremely scary. That looks so scary, I think I'm actually going to use the professional game that I'm going over right now, unbeknownst to you all, for my next lecture. And we'll be able to see exactly what white decides to do in the face of a variation like this. Because I did not make this up. This is just one of those games that I have kicking around the back of my head. And it'll tie in nicely with this lecture. So yes, next week I think I'll probably go over this game. What happens if white plays out the Aji in the last variation immediately? What variation did I just go over? Can I give you control so you can show me what you mean, Romulus? The long 4-4 variation? So pincer, this one you mean? Ah. And you're asking what happens if white goes ahead and comes in immediately? Then, even if white connects, you shouldn't be too worried. Because white's going to be contained. Let's just go ahead and give something away here. White's going to be contained, but the board is still open. That corner is too small. As long as you get Sente to continue developing the board, you should be fine. This is something that shouldn't be played later for a very good reason. And yeah, you do see that a lot, I guess. You do see people knowing the invasion, but not knowing really when to time the invasion. And that's always a big problem, yeah. If it's too early, it's because there are larger, more important moves on the board. And if you get Sente to take those, then it's fine. It becomes clear that, oops, I just made a mistake. I should not have played that. Really? Right away? Huh. That's more mid-game. Q8 variations? Q6 variations. Q6. Those I'll have to add as an addition later. Because this is, I almost want to say that's, I know variations here exist. They're, oh. Oh, right. I have completely omitted those. Yeah, yeah. This one I will actually go ahead and do. The others are going to be overplays. Now it's going to, or questionable overplays. Now it's going to go ahead and throw those into their own lecture. Here essentially you have two options still. Well, shoot. I guess you have quite a few options. You can play territorially, either here or here. If you play the shoulder hit, it's because you're not afraid of giving white this kind of thing. You're getting 4th and 5th line territory, and you know that's good for you. White gets to go ahead and approach, but that's open to reduction, or not approach, gets to go ahead and extend, but you know that's open for reduction. So you're not worried. Which is why typically, when we see this, white won't take this instead. White will go ahead and say, okay, I've got that later, but before I play it, let's do something else. And then typically black will follow up, white will do the same, and then at some point maybe white will go back in Hane. That way everything's left kind of open, white gets to settle, while leaving Aji in black's framework. And if we see something like this, we can go ahead and settle easily, and not feel inclined to actually have to keep responding. If, on the other hand, let's see, this used to be favorable as well. Not so much these days. Simply because this attachment tends to be annoying, especially for amateur players late in the game. Because if black gets greedy here, this cutting stone is still gonna live. There's too much. You can't really kill this, unfortunately. Love to, can't. So especially amateur players tend to shy away from 0-4 in favor of the one of the two territorial plays instead. Again, pincerring is kind of frowned upon, because if we go and once again continue with normal variation, well, normal variation here is for white to get influence, right? If you play something, let's say, like, oh frack, which way do we go? Mind blank. So this way. Suffice to say, we're killing off the corner. But we're killing off the corner for a very important reason. That is so we can... Actually, it's not that way, is it? I forgot this Joseki. Yeah. IR to remembering it again. Essentially, we're sacrificing the corner for outside influence, forcing, black to go ahead and capture the corner as long as we get influence in the middle. And if we're getting influence in the middle as white, then why are we playing the Kobayashi? Especially since this way we're kind of unsettling our K4 stones, so that's not that great of an idea. Oh, what else is here? I don't usually see the T-space high approach in general these days, now that I think about it. Shoot, it's already 9:06. I think I'm going to go ahead and cut the lecture here. I had meant to go on to one further point, and that's some basic continuations on how to further develop the Kobayashi depending on how you decided to play, including some whole board Fusekis. But I think I'm actually going to save that for maybe half of a lecture. I might do that next time, do the middle game next lecture, as well as the game I was referring to. Yeah, I might do that instead for next lecture. That sounds like a good idea. So I'll go ahead and cut this one short now.